everybody is enjoying the conference. I hope you enjoyed the lunch that Alter Egos provided. Okay, it's now my pleasure to introduce Sarah Napier, who is the CEO of United Way, and I want to remind you that United Way has been absolutely instrumental in ensuring that this event could take place, so thank you very much for your support there. And Sarah will talk to us about the United Way poverty agenda.
Hello everyone, and just thank you for being here today for such an important conversation topic. And certainly it's our pleasure to be co-sponsoring the event. We're really proud to be here. It's a room full of great minds, and it's been really interesting, all the conversations I've had a chance to have over lunch and the content that we've been hearing from our guest speakers. What I wanted to speak with you about today is just the fact that we all know that we have a really strong, amazing city in Halifax. We've got a great pride, great talent, but I think it's really critical that all of us in Halifax, and I know I'm speaking to the converted in this room, but we really understand that there are far too many people living in the shadows. And if we're going to become a really special, amazing city on a national scale, we have to dramatically strengthen our social fabric. So we know this, we all know this in our hearts. I think that's part of the motivation of why we've come here. And when I think about the city that we're in and the population and some of the information that defines who we are currently, you know, think about Halifax as being approximately 400,000 people. So if 12% of us are living in extreme poverty, 19% of children living in poverty. There are 1,700 shelter users in Halifax every year because people are homeless. Another 20% of us are experiencing food insecurity. That's actually the highest rate in Canada, with the exception of the territories. We heard earlier about precarious employment and social inclusion and loneliness. You know, there's 34% of people in Halifax say they feel isolated and alone, and they don't have a sense of community belonging. 24% of seniors are living alone, and 26% of us experience extreme life stress every day. This isn't meant to be a mathematical lesson, just more of creating a picture of some of the realities that face us, that we realize there's realities worldwide, and of course there's realities that we need to address right here in our own city. And with the United Way, and within my own heart personally as well, truly believe that this profile of our city is just not good enough. And that's why we're here. We have to change the story. And our part in changing the story is one that we're happy to contribute to. United Way Halifax, we raise money by working with the community to support others. We deliver programs, we fund 50 agencies in Halifax. We conduct research, and we also partner with so many other people who are doing incredible things, and we're very, very proud to do so. And we work in partnership specifically on issues of poverty and health and housing. So our vision for United Way Halifax is Halifax united by compassion, rich in opportunity, and free of poverty. And this is a vision that's going to drive us as we continue to work with everyone in this room and so many others, including in government and in business, to really make a different kind of Halifax a reality for all of us. And we need everyone to be involved. So again, we're proud to co-sponsor today, and just as an honor to be a part of such critical conversations. I'd like to introduce Max Chauvin. Max is a member of the United Way Halifax Board of Directors. He's also the chair of the Halifax Housing and Homelessness Partnership, and he's the chair of the United Way Opportunities Council. And we're very pleased to have Max as a dedicated, passionate volunteer. He's going to share a few more words about his own passions and how they connect to the mandate of United Way and the future of this city. Thank you.
For those of you who know some of my stuff with United Way, I'm about 10 hours away from actually demanding a desk at the office. So Sarah said I chair the Opportunities Council. So the United Way has four areas of foci in terms of community. And the Opportunities Council's area of focus is financial security for people in HRM so that they can pursue the opportunities that they want to pursue. And that involves a number of factors. It's, as Wayne described in his speech, it involves income. We can't have this conversation without a conversation about income. It involves housing, it involves skills, it involves a whole host of things. I was lucky several years ago to participate in the federal discussions around a new agenda for recreation in Canada. For those of you, again, who I know well, you know that in my daytime life, I'm the general manager of the Dartmouth Sportsplex. So I spend a lot of time working in community, and we do a significant amount of work in North Dartmouth and North Halifax on trying to find opportunities for recreation, free play, and sport for people in those areas. And through that work, I was introduced to the work from Professor Reitel and Weber from Berkeley, who in 1973 started using the term wicked problem. And we brought that to our work in United Way. Because what is a wicked problem? And my first reaction is it an evil problem? No, that wasn't what it was meant to define. But a wicked problem is one that is difficult to define. There are multiple truths about a situation. None of them are entirely right or wrong. Everybody in that conversation has different values and different viewpoints. There are multiple causal factors to the wicked problems that we have. Generally, when we apply solutions, they have unforeseen consequences. And when we apply a solution, the problem adjusts, it changes, the target moves. These aren't just technologically complex problems. They're socially complex too. They don't sit with just one department of government or one agency or one organization. Or one level of government even. And they absolutely require that we fundamentally change what we do and how we do it. And we've got some wicked problems in our community. Poverty is one of them. Homelessness, part of that. Indigenous disadvantage is another. Climate change, obesity, all of those are wicked problems. So what do we want to do? How do we go about it? There are authoritative approaches that we know don't work. There are coercive approaches that we know don't work. It's generally agreed that a collaborative approach is the only option with the hope of addressing wicked problems. So I believe that the following must be part of our approach. We must share a common vision and agreement for a better future and what that better future looks like. And I believe we share a very high-level agreement. I think as we get further down into that, we run into challenges. We must see policy, system, and practice change within government, but also within the public and private sectors. We also need to get out of our silos. We face it in government with justice, health, education, and other departments that, while they talk together, they don't work well together. And the same is true of municipal departments, of agencies, boards, and commissions that work together. We must break the silos. We must truly collaborate. We must be prepared to accept risk and be willing to experiment and innovate. And we are desperately risk-averse in many cases. So we must try that thing. We need to accept messy. It will not be neat, it will not be tidy, and we must find ways to do that. And we must engage a broad base of stakeholders to be collaborative, and we must drive this from the community and from the people who live these experiences up. So, United Way is committed to working with our community, and our contribution is in part our ability to bring people together. We have a huge, broad connection from our fundraising efforts, and we can leverage that to bring, hopefully, the right people into the room together who can help. That's what our commitment is. This is personal for me too. While I have never been homeless, my best friend spent years homeless, spent years struggling through the mental health system, and in the end committed suicide because we weren't able to help him and to help others around him. I also spent some time personally where I made some of those hard choices about what you can afford to eat and when you can't eat. And was always very blessed when I came to events like this and they had lunch, because that was the meal of the day. So I don't claim to know what it's like, but I certainly know I've touched the edge of it and realized how horrible it can be. And I think we must do something. So again, on behalf of United Way, thank you so much for coming and the conversations that have already started. And I saw people on lunch hour down here having conversations. I got to corner Wayne for a quick conversation about an interesting piece for me, and I know others did. So that was great. Let's keep those conversations going. And while the concepts that we're talking about today in many cases are simple, we've said this already, the devil will be in the details. They are complex and difficult sometimes, but the status quo is not acceptable. The solutions exist, and we as a community must find them, and we must make them happen. So again, enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you for letting us as United Way be part of it, and we were proud to help.
Thank you so much, Max. Okay. I'll work on this and I'll use this instead. I want to introduce two more people to you who have also been instrumental in organizing this, and that's Megan Jabush and Sarah Martin, and both again are graduate students at Dalhousie University on the Diversity Committee, and also Megan has joined us as part of the big Nova Scotia committee as well, so dual role. So thank you both for. And now Megan is going to introduce our next speakers, two speakers, Jeff Carabano and Fiona Trainer. Sorry. And if, oh, here they are. They're already here, so please.
Okay, so as Jenny said, I'm going to introduce Jeff Carabano and Fiona Trainer. So Dr. Jeff Carabano is a professor of social work at Dalhousie University in the Faculty of Health Professions and cross-appointed with International Development Studies, College of Sustainability, and the School of Health and Human Performance. He's worked with homeless young people in Toronto, Montreal, Halifax, and Guatemala. His research focuses primarily upon housing stability service delivery systems, street health, and homeless youth culture. He has completed a film documentary looking at the plight of street youth in Guatemala City and several animated shorts on Canadian street youth culture. He has two books in this area, Being Young and Homeless, and Leaving the Streets, Stories of Canadian Youth. Dr. Carabano is one of the founding members of Halifax's Out of the Cold Emergency Shelter, and is the co-director of the Dalhousie School of Social Work Community Clinic. Fiona Trainer, he's also very ready to present. Fiona Trainer is community legal worker at Dalhousie Legal Aid Service in Halifax. Ms. Trainer has been in this position for 8 years, and her work focuses on promoting welfare housing rights through public legal education and client-centered representation at administrative boards and tribunals. Ms. Trainer's previous work includes social justice advocate at the Yellowknife Women's Centre, where she worked with Aboriginal and Inuit women and families who faced historical and current poverty, discrimination, and oppression by social service agencies, the police, and the legal system. She also has several years of experience working in homeless shelters and at Stepping Stone, the only sex worker advocacy and support center in the Maritime Provinces. In addition to her current position at Dalhousie Legal Aid Services, Fiona is the current chair of the board of directors of Stepping Stone. She works on advocacy for sex workers, media relations, organizational success, and strategic board governance. And it's my pleasure to introduce their talk today, titled The Impacts of a Broken Welfare System.
Hi everyone. First of all, it's so nice to see so many people here open to discuss these big concepts and such significant ideas for a better world. I just came from a memorial of a friend, and kind of just walked out of it now feeling deeply fragile. Real sense of vulnerability, how sad it can be, and how life is very, very fragile. And then I remember that a lot of my work, especially with young people living on the streets, that notion of fragility, vulnerability, is so big in their worlds. One study that we're just completing in Toronto and Halifax looked at kind of the success stories of young people who've actually left the streets, who are in some form of stable housing. Most of them are on social assistance, and one of their core narratives is they're so scared that they'll be pulled away from them tomorrow, and even worse, whatever they have doesn't even match the basic needs in their worlds. So this fragility, this issue of fragility, really was a core story for them. And a lot of the men and women that I've been really honored to work with at the clinic, at the shelter, in my research, speak so much of this precarious existence. And at the memorial, one of the privileges was we were there amongst friends, and these friends held each other. And we kind of had this sense of support and care. It was a system of love and care. And as kind of Fiona and I have reflected on the larger structures of the Department of Community Services, and especially around social assistance, wouldn't it be nice if that system could also present itself as a mechanism of support, mechanisms of justice, a culture that could provide a deep sense of compassion and holding people, especially at a point in their lives where they are so fragile. So as I think about it, we need a just system. And a lot of what we've spoken about this morning around a guaranteed income mechanisms can provide that hope. What we're going to talk about today is more the system and its impacts on people who are in it. It's a broken system. The Honorable Joanne Bernard, Minister of Department of Community Services, spoke close to a year ago declaring our system is broken and changes are needed. The department declared that core social programs have not been able to keep up to pace with modern best practice development. And it's been suggested that by 2019, we will see what those changes include. We don't know what the proposed changes are. They promise consultation. They speak of widespread reform, modernizing programs, ensuring that the needs of Nova Scotians are met. The department and that system is a very formal bureaucracy with numbers of programs, policies, employees, systems, structures, departments. It's a system we're told is consistently underfunded, slow to adapt and change, staff moving around, burnout is endemic, staff don't feel they're trained properly, they have the supports, they don't have the discretion or autonomy to carry out their work. But it's also a deeply punitive system. It's rigid, it's focused on surveillance, and it's primarily directed to getting people back to work, with very little understanding that a large majority on social assistance will either be in and out of employment or will not be back to employment due to physical and mental health needs. It's a system that continually sees its clientele as undeserving and untrustworthy, not as human beings. And if anything we can do, and Fiona and I's talk today, is to present the need for the system to see its clientele as human beings. This memorial really hit me as we struggled with the loss of a friend. We were together as human beings. And systems that provide basic structures for populations, primary populations that are marginalized, that are in need, have to see them as human beings. So it's a broken system, and we all agree with that. First voice consultations that recently were released highlights the system is deeply dehumanizing. It's heartless. Workers have enormous caseloads. There's way too much paperwork. Wayne and I were just talking about the dreaded annual reports. There's a lack of response to clientele. Workers changing all the time. As somebody notes, we don't have a face, we're simply a number. So yes, a broken system. And we know that approximately $2 million is going to be put into this broken system to transform, to write it, to vision, to design a new way. And possibly this could be the way. But we know that's not going to be the way that is being shaped. What we're seeing on the ground is much deeper insecurity in terms of food, housing, basic needs, employment. There's really a very deep sense of fragility out there. And on top of that, and my interest has always been kind of how populations that are living on the street, also how they see themselves, the sense of connection, the sense of humanness in their worlds. And what we're seeing more and more is that not only are we seeing fragility in terms of basic structures, but also in social psychological dimensions. Limited opportunities for mobility, decreased self-esteem, confidence, limited sense of independence, very little in terms of security. And that's reinforced through a deeply inhumane and unjust system. Both the clinic that I work with and out of the cold shelter, we see this day in and day out. The majority of the populations that we're honored to be working with are actually on social assistance, but still cannot, in their day-to-day, live in a human way. So I was thinking, before Fiona comes and speaks to the day-to-day realities in more concrete ways, I thought I would pen a letter to the minister. And I've actually penned many letters to the minister, but this one is around what we can do right now. If true reform is on the table, and basic guaranteed income is something we can see in a few years, what can we do right now? And I think some of the dimensions are the same, but I just want to highlight a few core dimensions. And I'm going to do it from a lens on social determinants of health. We have to start to see that the system is not simply about poverty reduction, it's also a system of building a sense of health. We know there's ample evidence, we know this, there is detailed analytical exploration that there's pervasive damaging health inequities that exist in this province. And I think, as Wayne noted, it's not just about this. This doesn't just exist here in Nova Scotia, but as a focus, I want to highlight here. We know that individuals that are living with low income, education, or employment, or other lines of social inequity have poor health. Right? That's clear. We know those pieces. And we know that the roots of that inequity lies in a lot of social determinants of health, like precarious work, unemployment, inadequate housing, homelessness, racism, social exclusion, inequitable access to resources. And those who are on social assistance are even more disadvantaged in that grading of health supports. And within social assistance, there's also amorphous subpopulations. Racialized Canadians, women, who experience multiple intersecting barriers towards good health. We need a more responsive, compassionate structure. And unfortunately, the current system doesn't do that at all. Like, it doesn't view its work as reducing poverty, nor as a defining component in terms of building good health. So a more enabling system, a more supportive system, would allow for a couple of criteria. And a guaranteed annual income has to as well. We have to ensure that populations have a full basket of supports, essential to maintaining one's health. Adequate income, housing, nutrition, nutritious foods, and being able to have access to health services. We need to ensure that wider health and social services, so critical to ameliorating the harsh realities of poverty, are allowed. And we need to create opportunities for people to build their skills and capacities, to improve their circumstances, enhance that notion of social mobility. The system right now reinforces deep health inequities. It doesn't provide enough income. I think we highlight this enough during the day. It's not an adequate standard of living in terms of housing, in terms of supports. It doesn't accommodate for the intricacies of the needs of individuals with chronic, episodic, or other health conditions. And it traps individuals into this broken system, because if they leave it, they will lose the meager benefits that actually they have. We have to understand that there's different trajectories into poverty and out of poverty, and we need a system that's flexible, that's understanding, that provides a basket of supports, a compassionate care for human beings that need that support. So it needs to be adequate. We need a system that's adequate, that's flexible, that's person-centered, and that's health-enabling. It's not just about basic income security, it's also about health security. Any reform has to be grounded in solid values. And in a rich and prosperous society like ours, no one should be left behind. No one's health should be stunted by social or economic inequality. So this needs a fundamental shift in approach from rigid enforcement and surveillance to building individual and community capacity and opportunity. It's about enhancing the social human capital. And that will create a more fair, a more engaged system. And we're not naive around the fiscal realities of any of these reforms. But it has to be balanced against the cost of not acting. Deeper health insecurities, increased demands on already taxed and overwhelmed and strained systems, and more people that are left behind. Thank you.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming out today, and thanks for asking me to speak at this important conference today. I'm going to just follow up on what Jeff had to say about the kind of the broken system that we have now. So there's not a lot of kind of good news in what I'm going to say, but I think it bears repeating. I think we've heard throughout the day from different speakers that there are inadequacies in the current system, but it is the system that we have now. And the government could, in the shorter term, do a better job at following the laws around the legal assistance system right now, which they choose not to do in a lot of instances. So my title is not working. To see. So I just wanted to look at some of the numbers. You know, this is the difference between a market basket measurement and the annual income of basic income assistance recipients by category. This is from 2012. And if you just look at the numbers, you can see, and again, keeping in mind that the income assistance numbers are solely related to shelter allowance and personal allowance, not including special needs, which are another category of income assistance. But I mean, it bears repeating that obviously people who are living on income assistance in this province are woefully underfunded to live in any kind of dignity. And I see this in my practice at work at Del Housing Legal Aid Service and in other work that I've done before. And again, I'm just going to go through some numbers here. So there's approximately 44,000 people on income assistance in Nova Scotia currently, and all live well below the poverty line. Approximately 60% of people on income assistance are considered either long-term or short-term disabled. And I really want people to keep that in mind, that percentage, because that is a significant number of people who are receiving income assistance who will need supports, whether it's the current system we have or whether it's a basic income guarantee system. People will need individualized supports to meet their needs, their specific needs related to their mental health disabilities, their physical disabilities, whatever disabilities they have. People on income assistance cannot afford market rent. The shelter rates, shelter includes rent and all your utilities when you're on income assistance. Shelter rates haven't increased in over 20 years. So if you are a person on income assistance and you are considered able to work and you are eligible for income assistance, you will receive $300 for your shelter allowance per month. And as we know, $300 doesn't get you anything in Nova Scotia, anywhere in Nova Scotia. And in rural Nova Scotia, the statistics show that it's even more expensive to rent. People can't afford to pay their Nova Scotia power bills, which gets them into arrears, which causes all sorts of stress. People can't afford to pay for their heat and their fuel. People cannot afford nutritious food. The personal allowance, there hasn't been an increase in 2 or 3 years now, so the basic personal allowance is $255 a month for people on income assistance, and that doesn't change. People cannot afford transportation to go and buy their groceries, to go and do their laundry, those basic kind of tasks that most of us would take for granted. People on income assistance can't afford to buy a bus pass. And I'll get into a little bit more of that issue later because that is an important issue to talk about. Nova Scotia is #1 in Canada for food insecurity. I think we heard that from the United Way spokesperson. 1 in 5 households lack access to nutritious food in this province. And not only are people who are living on income assistance malnourished, and I say that in all its fulsome truth, people are at risk of becoming homeless due to not being able to pay their rent, etc. And I've walked through that process with many of my clients who have been evicted into homelessness because they are trying to pay their rent on the income assistance rates and they simply cannot do it. People live under, as Jeff said, a punitive surveillance created by the Department of Community Services to detect and deter fraud. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that further on in the presentation. I just wanted to turn your attention to the Employment Support Income Assistance Act, ESIA Act. And I wanted us to look at the preamble of that act. Jeff talked about establishing a caring, a system that actually supports people where they're at. And we have to be realistic here. The current system does not support people where they're at. The current system wants people to get off of income assistance and get a job. And again, I've walked through situations with many of my clients where they have been told to get a job, it doesn't matter what kind of job you get. You need to work. So when we look at the preamble, and this is from the Act. The Act is a law of Nova Scotia. And the Act talks about an act, if we look at the top paragraph, an act to encourage the attainment of independence and self-sufficiency through employment support and income assistance. And I won't go through the whole preamble, but you can look at it and you can see that all throughout that preamble, which states the basic focus of the program. It is to get people back to work without taking into consideration their abilities, their disabilities, their goals, and their focus. Next, I want to just look at some of the priorities that the government has laid out over the last 4 years. Every year, every fiscal year, the government of Nova Scotia, the departments and agencies, have to provide the government, their government, with statements of mandate. And these are available online, and I would encourage people to keep an eye open for these and go online and take a look at them. Because these are what the government says are their focus and their goals. And this is to do with the Department of Community Services. So I'm just going to read through the list. So 2012 to 2013, the stated goal, it's not the only goal, but it's one of the goals, one of the main goals. Reduce the caseload on income assistance by 3,000 and help to connect recipients with the labor market. 2013 to 2014, reduce the caseload by 1,600 and implement an employment-first approach. And we don't know exactly what that meant then, and we don't know what it means now. 2014 to 2015, increase the number of Nova Scotians living independent of income assistance and work with the labor and advanced employment to streamline and improve access to employment programming. 2015 to 2016, increase the number of Nova Scotians living independent of income assistance and continue working with Careers Nova Scotia, and then in parentheses LAE, and the focus will be on the development of employment maintenance supports and to reduce the number of people re-entering the employment support income assistance program. So why I highlighted this along with the preamble is because it shows that the current system that we have is not there to support people. It is there to cut people off income assistance and get them back to work without taking into consideration their specific individual needs. The other point I wanted to make about the current system is that Jeff talked about this, and some of the other speakers have talked about this as well. But the system that we currently have, it is really reinforcing the stigma about people living in poverty and needing the support of the wider community through the income assistance program. What I would say is that the idea that citizens have an entitlement to assistance based on need has been replaced with the construction of poor people as a public burden who should themselves be held responsible and even personally blamed for their circumstances, right? And I think as an extension of that, it sets up the income assistance recipient as kind of owing, quote unquote, the honest taxpayer, the one who pays for the income assistance program. It sets up a real kind of volatile relationship between taxpayers and people on income assistance that is narrow and doesn't take into account people's needs. And I would also say that when we just look back at the previous slide and we look at the priorities and we look at the preamble of the Act itself, that we have what's known as workfare. And this is obviously becoming more and more a focus for this province. People on income assistance are being encouraged or forced to go back to work. Again, it doesn't matter what kind of work you receive. And what I would like to do is I just want to read very briefly from an article that quotes the current minister, Joanne Bernard of Department of Community Services, and her reinforcement of the stigma for people on income assistance. This is from May 4th, 2015. Joanne Bernard says there is an extraordinarily high number of people in the province staying on income assistance and employment support longer than they should be. She said that though she cannot give the exact number, it is something she is committed to changing. So we have the stated mandate of the Department of Community Services, the Minister of the Department of Community Services, with no proof that people on income assistance are staying on the system longer than they should be. Just because she thinks that's the way it is. And because she thinks that's the way it is, that's what's happening through this transformation process. She goes on to state that my philosophy on the whole income assistance and social housing program has always been you help folks, you lift them up, and where they need to be, you support them in reaching their full outcome, and then move on, Bernard said. Well, that's not what happens now. And we know, I won't go into the details about Ms. Bernard's background and how she did get lifted up. And she did live on income assistance for 9 years. And she took full advantage of going to university while she was on income assistance. And that's a good thing. And that's the way it should be for everybody on income assistance who wants to go to university or community college or wherever it is that they want to do to get training in order to get off of income assistance, if that's their goal, and if they are able to do that. What I would also say is that I've been involved in many cases where people on income assistance do not want to be on income assistance, and they want to get training. I have had clients who have been cut off because they want to finish their GED, and that was not a stated goal of their case plan. I've had that, I've worked with people. We've had to go to appeals for this type of issue. Last year, Dalhousie Legal Aid represented a client at Supreme Court who had been in the Career Seek program, and I'll get into what the Career Seek program is a little bit later. This program allows people on income assistance to go to university and still receive income assistance, still receive a shelter allowance and a basic needs allowance. They have to apply for student loans, and they have to find other sources of income to support themselves. My client had been in the Career Seek program, was attending university, had every intention of leaving the income assistance program when she graduated with a half-decent degree, being able to get hopefully a half-decent job. And they decided to do an annual review. And the annual review pointed out that she was receiving student loans and receiving income assistance, which is the stated mandate that someone has to do when they're in the Career Seek program. The department took this instance of this young woman, and they said that because you are receiving student loans, which they say you have to receive, they said that she had too much income and she was cut off of income assistance, putting her into jeopardy, putting her and her family into jeopardy, and also stopping her from continuing to attend university. This is a young woman who is smart, goal-oriented, exactly what the department says they want people to be, but they stymied her and they put her back by at least 2 years. They took her to Supreme Court and we won, because the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia justifiably recognized that a student loan is not income, it's a debt that has to be repaid. And so she was able to get back on the system and continue on with her university education. However, what I would say is that the system that says that they don't want people on income assistance and they want people to get training, and then they do this to people who obviously don't want to be on the system, there's obviously something very wrong with it. But my question is, why doesn't the government right now follow its own laws and regulations and support people where they are now, instead of waiting for a transformation program where we have no idea what's going to happen. Why don't they start right now and support people living a decent life? So what I would also like to say, point out, is that the current system is very adversarial, right? And Jeff alluded to this as well. So the system is fundamentally, and I do mean this truthfully, is fundamentally distrustful of recipients and applicants. And they are under suspicion, not only in their interactions with the welfare system, but even with neighbors, landlords, teachers, etc. That is anyone who might take up the government's call to help them to root out and deter fraud. Because they do accept anonymous calls, and it happens more often than you like to think it happens, where people call up recipients, caseworkers, and report that they have other sources of income or whatever it is. The current program also, it insists that income assistance recipients prove themselves worthy. That's a very old term, worthy, unworthy, poor. You can look back throughout history and look at the Elizabethan poor laws that allotted who was the worthy and who were the unworthy poor. But they have to prove themselves worthy, and they have to be able to show that they spend the government money that they receive on things that they should do, that the government wants them to, and that applicants and recipients waive their rights to privacy and personal freedom in order to get the meager amount that they currently get. I just want to kind of talk a little bit more about that, right? I think a lot of people in this room work with people who are in income assistance, and they would know that people who are applying for income assistance, they have to sign broad consents of release of information, of personal information sharing agreements with a host of state and non-state entities, landlords, social workers, doctors, insurance companies, etc. There's an ongoing requirement for the extensive and ongoing production of verification of documentation to prove that they are eligible. And then they have different parts of the income assistance program. One part is called the early detection prevention section, and that's when someone initially applies for income assistance and they think that there is a problem with the honesty and the validity of the information they've provided the department. The department has special workers, they're called eligibility review officers, who specifically do investigative work on people who are applying for income assistance. They also have the eligibility review process, which is when you're already on income assistance and they get a call, an anonymous call, or they look at your Facebook page and they see that you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a partner that you didn't tell them about. And that happens, by the way. I've been in income assistance appeal hearings where some of the department's evidence were based on Facebook posts of recipients. They look at people's personal information. It's quite incredible. So what I'm trying to show is that the department devotes a certain amount of money to the stigmatization, the beforehand assumptions that people are already cheating the system. And I think that people who work with people on income assistance and people who receive income assistance, they know that this happens. I just have a couple of more slides, and I just wanted to talk about the lack of accountability that our current program operates under. So I just wanted to briefly touch on the fact that prior to 1996, there was a funding agreement between the provinces, territories, and the federal government called the Canada Assistance Plan. And that plan allocated certain amounts of money to different parts of social service delivery. And with that plan, the provinces and the territories, they had to adhere to standards, federal standards that said, if I live in Nova Scotia, then they're going to provide me with X amount of dollars to live at this standard. Now, in 1996, Paul Martin, who was the then finance minister, the Liberals scrapped that program, and it went through a few iterations of changes, but now we have what's called the Canada Social Transfer, And it is the primary source of federal funding in Canada that supports provincial and territorial social programs, right? Including social assistance. The federal legislation that binds the provinces and territories to the federal government under the Canada Social Transfer, the only condition that the provinces and territories must meet, the only one, so there's no more standards, the Nova Scotia doesn't have to show the federal government that yes, in fact, we are providing an adequate standard of living for people on income assistance. The only condition that people have to, that provinces and territories have to show is that there's no minimum residency standard. So I have freedom of movement in this country, and I can move to a different province, and I can move to a different territory, and I don't have to live there for a certain period of time in order to be eligible for income assistance. Other than that, there's no standards, none. So we have a quite clear lack of accountability for the current program. And what I wanted to touch on the transportation allowance specifically, because when I talk about lack of accountability, what I'm also talking about is a bureaucratic system that changes quite often. The Employment Support Income Assistance Act is a difficult thing to change. That has to go through a whole legislative process. It is the regulations which kind of flesh out the act and give more details about the actual running of the program. They can be changed relatively easily with what's called an ordering council, and that has happened a few times over the last 2 or 6 years. But what the Department of Community Services does regularly is change the policy manual. Now, people who work with people with income assistance or people who are receiving income assistance will often hear their workers say, I can't give you that because the policy manual doesn't allow it. The policy manual is not the law. The policy manual is an internal bureaucratic document that the Department of Community Services uses to administer the program to what I would say is their liking. So when we talk about a specific issue like bus passes, so it used to be, I would say 3-4 years ago, it used to be a little more easy for people on income assistance to get a bus pass, which would allow them a freedom of mobility for a whole month, right? You can use your bus pass over and over again, wherever you want to go, as many times a day as you have to. Around 3 years ago, the Department of Community Services changed the policy, again, not the law. They changed the policy that actually doesn't adhere to the law. It doesn't match the law. So what they did was they said, okay, Fiona, you want a bus pass? Well, no, you're not getting a bus pass anymore because you have to show us that you have 10 or more medical appointments a month, right? And that was across the board. They've done this. And that change, it may sound like not a lot to some of us in the room, but that change caused social isolation. It disallowed people from going, like I said earlier, to get their groceries easily. People with mobility issues are very much affected by this change. And there's no basis in the law for it. So what do people have? What are the options that people have to fight against a change like that, a policy change like that? Well, going back to the adversarial nature of the program, they can appeal it. There is an appeals process through the Department of Community Services, and there's a 3-level appeals process. I won't go into the details. However, what I would say is that process is long. It takes a long time. It means that people are cut off from that bus pass or whatever other special need they might have. They are cut off from it first, and then through the appeals process they have to prove that they need it again. So by doing that, the government, and I've said this on the CBC and I'll just say it again until somebody listens to me, the government is breaking the law. They're not following their own laws. But because they have the power to do that, make those internal changes and those policy changes, and people on income assistance have very little power in this system, it means that people are very reluctant to challenge it because they're already under so much stress and they're already suffering so much that they don't, most people, and justifiably so, don't want to go through the process of appealing it up the chain. in income assistance. The other thing I talked about one of my clients in the Career Seek program, and I'm not checking my email. I'm going to bring up an article, a recent article, that talked about the Career Seek program. And so the Career Seek program, like I said, is a program, they still call it a pilot project. It's been in effect for around 8 years. It was supposed to allow people on income assistance to go to university, right? A post-secondary education course of 2 years or longer. And they have not well advertised that program, and they have not allowed people, let me say, they put up a lot of barriers to people accessing that system. So just recently, just last month actually, the Department of Community Services, because the NDP party in this province asked them for details about the Career Seek program, they released some information about the Career Seek program, which has the stated aim of getting people off of income assistance and getting them trained and getting them jobs, which is what they keep on telling us they want people to do. So in 2013, 2014, they allowed 2 people to access the Career Seek program. In 2014, 2015, 4 people accessed the Career Seek program. And 1 person has accessed the Career Seek program 2015, 2016. So currently we have some options available to the Department of Community Services to help people move forward if that's what they're choosing to do, and they choose not to do it. And the department admitted that it's a failed program. But it's a failed program because they haven't allowed anybody, or they've allowed very few people to actually access it. Now, I'm just going to end on this particular point that, we talk about the right to an adequate standard of living, the right to water. We talk about all those types of rights. And it's important to remember that Canadians, people on income assistance, and all of us have our government, the government of Canada, in consultation with the provinces and the territories, have signed on to many international, UN-protected international covenants that protect human rights. One of them is called the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, right? And we're talking about adequate housing, water, sanitation, work and related rights, adequate food, adequate standard of living under that covenant, right? And Canada has, the federal government of Canada has been lambasted several times by the Special Raconteur, the UN Special Raconteur, criticizing Canada for not upholding these standards, not upholding these human rights. And I think that, it's all fine and good for the federal government and the provincial government to talk about human rights and to say that they support human rights. But when they allow people who are on income assistance, 60%, let's not forget, of whom are considered long-term or short-term disabled, when they continue to allow people to live in poverty, malnourished, underhoused, risk of eviction, when they continue to do that, that means that they're not following those international standards that we have signed on to. So what I would like to end on is just say that, a clear framework for accountability for the funding and providing social programs is needed. And I think it's also very interesting, and I'm just going to go to one more document, where the provincial government actually kind of stepped up, and they did recognize at UN convention that they are responsible for upholding. So this was from the Department of Community Services 2014-2015 Statement of Mandate. And what it says is, because while we're going through this transformation of the Employment Support and Income Assistance Program, there's also the transformation or the change, the roadmap, I think they call it, for the Services for Persons with Disabilities Program, which is a sub-program of the ESIA. So what they did say, though, in their 2014-2015 Statement of Mandate was, and I'm quoting, on March 11th, 2010, Canada ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, making a commitment to abide by the convention. The province supported Canada in ratification, and developing accessibility legislation will move Nova Scotia to the forefront in recognizing the rights of our disabled population. So with that, the government has said we do recognize that we have responsibilities, and there are standards that we have to live up to for people with disabilities and for people who qualify for the Disability Support Program. That's what it's called now. But they have totally ignored their obligations for everybody else on income assistance, even though there is the covenant that protects human rights and adequate living standards. So what I would say is, why is there a difference? Why is there a difference for one group of Nova Scotians, and it means that their international human rights are going to be looked at and even considered in the development of this program? But when we hear about the transformation for the Employment Support Income Assistance Program, we hear nothing about human rights. We hear about people needing to get off of income assistance and get a job. And that's just not fair. Thank you.